But I'm concerned on the user side, the male side, the subscriber side of it, because I don't believe, like, the thing that this is as a Jordan Peterson fan, one would expect that I might have a negative view of Marxism and communism. But when the Marxists say, like, capitalism monetizes and materializes everything and ruins it, I don't think there's a better example of that than OnlyFans. And I don't just mean on the sex work side. I think, like, porn is one thing. Like, to the person, like, you know, like, go watch porn. It's a porn star, you know, doesn't know I watch it or anything. But an OnlyFans model who I can pay for intimacy, emotional intimacy, where we can exchange messages and we can talk, that to me is like, that is dystopian level. Capitalism has monetized human intimacy itself. And I am willing to change my mind. But I feel very strongly, and it would take some mind changing to get over this feeling, that there is no scenario, there's some. For young men, for the example that sex workers usually go to is like old men whose like wives have died. They'll like call a sex worker to like, you know, lay with them and they don't even have sex. It's like, okay, fair enough. But for young men, 18, 19, 20, who have their whole life ahead of them, who have never been in a relationship, to develop a parasocial relationship with an OnlyFans model who's not only providing them, you know, simulated sex through, you know, content, but then also emotional intimacy. That's like dystopian level. I was a Jordan Peterson fan. I'm now on the Marxist side. That's how bad it is, I think. Because I don't think there is, and maybe we need more research, but it's like, there's also like an intuitive sense of like, there's absolutely no way that can be good for any young guy's mental health, you know? And do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think there's a case or evidence or even just a theory that like that could be good for young men paying for emotional intimacy?
It's probably going to be more niche cases. Like the reality is like, yeah, probably for a few, but the reality is like just because there's niche cases.
What would that look like, do you think? Just out of curiosity.
For example, right, like there's a lot of men that I've spoken to that have like pretty significant major disabilities that realize that they'll basically pretty much never get a woman because it's like disfigured them to some level.
That's a good point. That's actually
right. So they can get some level of social exchange. A lot of OnlyFans models that I talk to as well, as they like talk with men and stuff, they give like some level of feedback of like things that are socially appropriate and things that are not. Not all models do this necessarily, right? Because with anything that has potential risk of harm, I think there is a neutral way you can engage in it. There's probably sometimes a beneficial way, sometimes there's not. And then there's a lot of negative ways that you can engage with it. And I think our society isn't being super honest about all the negativity that it can have. But we also have to realize that there can be some positivity. For example, if some person has some serious issues with social skills, they have a very, very, very poor time reading social skills, so they aren't, like they can't read implied consent at all. They have no idea when it's happening.
Sure. Autistic, severely autistic or something.
Severely autistic, and there's a couple of other like social disorders that can cause that, right? That's within the autism spectrum, but yeah, I'm thinking more like learning disorders that are nobody talks about because they're not sexy. Right, these individuals could potentially benefit from having some level of like a paid interaction. So, example, I'm like, what about sex therapy? Would we be comfortable with sex therapy if like sex work?
Like you pay a therapist to have sex with you and like kind of.
And teach you like certain steps, for example, like when implied consent isn't happening, like would we be comfortable with that? And it's like, I feel a little weird about it, but I'm also like knowingly,
I feel a little weird about it, but yeah.
I'm prudely around sex. And so I'm like, is my feeling weird about it just my shit?
Sure.
Because
yeah, there's definitely personality differences that take into account. Like I have a friend, I'm also on the more prudish like side, I'd say, for what that is worth. But I have friends who are like very, like meet a girl, fall in love, and then have sex with someone else like 2 weeks later, and it's just like, dude, you're in a different world from me. But I recognize that's a personality, that's a temperamental difference. He's, you know, more open to experience in certain ways than I am.
Yeah, and so like a lot of people will like this is a fight I'll get into with Christians, right? Where they're like, well, morally you wouldn't do this, and I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't, but I don't know if the reason I'm deciding this is actually because of morality, or if it's just fifis. And if I can't decide, there's no fucking way I'm putting that on somebody else, because I'm not going to put my fifis as a moral judgment on somebody else. That seems asininely stupid to do. So like the prescription for myself isn't going to be the same as somebody else. And so I'm like, yeah, I can see really positive things, right? There's a lot of sex workers who do a ton of sex education. They do talk about like consent and what it can look like and what it can't look like. It can give men access to sexuality in a way that's much safer than, for example, like going into like really obscure, like unclear consensual situations with women and stuff like that. The issue is that we have to be honest about the harm that it also poses.
Right. And
so it's kind of like
systemic incentives, because there's a financial incentive, right?
It's like, can alcohol be good? Of course, alcohol can be kind of good.
Payday
it's great
loans,
for
example.
exchange.
Like this is the libertarian argument. It was like payday loans. Like you can make a case that someone should be allowed to get a payday loan, a really bad loan with a really high interest rate, because in their niche circumstance, if they just get this amount of money, they'll be able to pay it back and it works out. But by and large, the system incentivizes charging high interest rates and screwing people over and whatnot, so that it becomes like a different scenario. Or like even doing like heroin or something like that. Like, are there people who could benefit from doing heroin? Yeah, probably someone who's disabled, end of life, or something like that. God knows.
Going into, yeah, I mean,
right, but
morphine's used for surgery
specifically,
all the
yes,
time.
yes, but in the context of, let's say, young, otherwise healthy men and women, although, you know, it's easier for me to relate to the experience of, you know, young men, obviously. But let's say for young, healthy men who otherwise don't have like a disability, or, you know, if but for lack of social skills, not because of like autism or something, but just because of no having experience, there is, I think, virtually no excuse to be on OnlyFans. And the reason I don't believe in making it illegal is because I'm also, again, it's like a responsibility thing. It's like, hey, men, there's an infinite number of temptations out in the world, and it's not society's responsibility to remove all of those temptations. So if OnlyFans is out there, it's not the government's responsibility to make it illegal. Now, for children, you know, obviously that's not an issue with OnlyFans per se, but like porn in general, it's a whole other conversation. But like, my advice to men would be like, look, I'm not advocating making it legal, but you damn well better not do it, because it's not, if you start paying and you get this illusion of intimacy and it's like, oh, we're friends and I love you and I have you know, the secret message is I have a financial incentive to make it feel as, you know, emotionally connected as possible, you know, which is what the model was saying to the male. It's like, especially if you have low social skills, you're not going to be able to differentiate like, oh, they're being nice to me because, did they laugh at my joke because I'm genuinely funny? Or do they laugh at my joke because when they laugh at my joke, I pay them every month? You know, it's like, to me, that that gets into like, resurrect Karl Marx from the dead and, you know, we will, you know, save our societies.
Yeah. I think it's probably understudied. So any of the positive benefits are probably not well understood. So it's quite possible that theoretically it's like, well, what if it actually has this incredible harm reduction risk? Like, what if it broadly isn't good for people, but if people are like suicidal and it's basically all they have left, maybe that might be like
that's the heroin argument, right? It's like,
yeah, so this is like the niche thing. What if it's really, really good for the cam models? Like exceedingly good for a lot of them. It's good for their self-esteem and blah, blah, blah. And also, even if it's bad,
selling heroin is good for the drug dealers, but yeah.
Here's the thing. I think you can be on OnlyFans and have a really healthy relationship with it. And I think you can be on OnlyFans and not. And the problem is we don't talk a lot about it, right? I think it's the same with alcohol. You can use alcohol in a really healthy, reasonable way. Even though alcohol has zero beneficial effects for your body at all, it's just toxin. It facilitates some level of social fun. A lot of people will bond over like having some drinks of wine.
That's why this conversation has been going so well.
Yeah, it's ceremonial to some extent, right? So it's like, I wouldn't want to ban alcohol, even though there's no like biological benefits. Like it's just toxins for your brain, essentially. It's still something that people can interact with in a healthy way.
Pure
right?
physiological, physical health is not the only consideration. Right?
Exactly.